we need to be more in tune with what's going on our individual farms, and we need to use the information that we have available on our farms to make those decisions. And look, it takes a bit of time, and people have to be confident in doing that. And I think if people aren't sure, they need to reach out to their advisor or their discussion group or somebody that they know who's a bit more experienced or a bit more confident. There is help there, but I suppose it's about being proactive rather than reactive. I think that can help reduce stress and make things a little bit easier for everybody to deal with.
It's great to be back with another Environment Edge podcast, and you're very welcome to the show. Sustainable grass production can play a major role on Irish farms, leading to more profitability, but also reducing nitrogen loss from our farms through the use of clover and utilising available data to make quick decisions. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Hennessy.
We are Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and we're back for another Environment Edge podcast, number 108, and here we go.
We are joined today by Dr. Deirdre Hennessy, UCC lecturer in sustainable agriculture, and we started off by asking Deirdre what are the barriers to implementing a good grass clover system on farms.
White clover, I suppose, has loads to offer our systems from an animal productivity point of view. So milk, we're talking about dairy farming, so milk yield, milk solids yield. And then there are the benefits in terms of nitrogen fixation, which I suppose in a way it's the plant is making its own nitrogen available, and it doesn't need that chemical nitrogen. So, and then you have the economic benefits if you have a reduction in chemical fertilizer use and an increase in milk yield. But there is no doubt that it is challenging to get it on. And I suppose one of the big things, Cathal, is soil fertility. And I think the figure is, and you can correct me, it's only around 24% of dairy farms have optimum soil fertility. So that's optimum soil pH, P and K indexes. And, we need good soil fertility for grass, but clover is definitely more sensitive to poor soil fertility. So that's the first barrier. And look, a farmer isn't just going to see the benefit there in terms of having clover. They're definitely going to see more persistence of the productive grass species as well in their swards if they have good soil fertility, and they're going to get better use of the chemical fertilizer, chemical nitrogen that they apply. So soil fertility, as I said, is one issue. Another issue is grazing management and the whole thing. How do you manage your sward? And look, if you're good at grassland management, so you're measuring weekly and you're using your wedge, for example, at this time of the year, and you're not leaving covers get too high and you're getting good graze outs and so on, all of that is really beneficial in terms of the clover as well and helping with the persistence of it. So another barrier is there are a lot of farmers who don't measure, or they might measure, but they don't necessarily utilize the data they're getting back. And look, data is powerful. There is that saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, but like if you don't actually know what you have, it's very difficult to manage it. So grazing management, soil fertility, and then another one is actually getting the clover into the sward, like establishing it, full reseed or over sowing. But in both those cases, soil fertility is really important. But then what you do when you get the seed as sown and starts to emerge. So in a full reseed, post-emergent spray is very important so that you don't have a big load of weed burden in the field, which will shade out the clover. And in both cases, getting in early and grazing off the grass. So the grass does grow when you sow when you do a reseed, the grass component will grow a bit faster than the clover. So it's important not to leave that cover get too high, because ultimately what happens is the grass will shade out the clover. It'll block the light. Plant needs light for energy to grow. So you need to graze it when the cover is low, but the plants are established. And similarly in a reseed, you don't want the cover getting too high, because again, it'll shade out those tiny little clover seedlings as they're emerging. And then the other thing probably is to watch the nitrogen initially. Put out less nitrogen or no nitrogen if you can afford to skip, especially in an oversown paddock, for a rotation at least, and then maybe go half rate. Simply because grass takes up nitrogen from the soil faster than clover does, so it'll grow faster. And again, we're back to the shading out of clover. So shading of clover is a big factor. If it's not getting light, it's not going to have energy to grow. They're probably the main things, Cahill, around clover. Looking at the cultivar you're putting in, so pick a medium-leaved cultivar, and the earlier you can reseed and oversow in the year, the better. So like April time is good because we tend not to see droughts in April, May. June, you're pushing into July. Like I don't know, Deirdre, you said at the start, we've absolutely glorious weather right now. But if you have seedlings, they haven't a hope because the top of the soil is dry and roots are shallow. So, yeah, there's some of the things, Cahill, that people can do to I suppose to help with clover and get it functioning on the farm. Soiled water this time of the year in the summer, if you're cutting out nitrogen, soiled water, so dairy washings and so on, is very beneficial because there is a little bit of P and K and a small bit of nitrogen in it, and that definitely helps the swards. And then monitoring soil fertility on an ongoing basis once you've your swards established. But really, grazing management is very important.
We're going to switch now to red clover, and I suppose
Okay.
I've been out on farms, different types of farms in Kilkenny, some with high molybdenum soils, some not with high molybdenum soils, and a lot of the farmers are disappointed with the short-lived red clover varieties, in swards, and how they can manage them, and also I suppose looking, with research mixing the chicory with the red clover. Is there any research ongoing at the moment and trying to increase the longevity, or is it simply just down to good management practices?
There's a mix going on there, Deirdre. So red clover is generally a silage crop, mostly because its growing point is high in the sward, so it's around 5 centimeters. And if you're grazing, would like to graze to around 4 centimeters, it's going to be grazed out of the sward. With silage, really important not to be putting out nitrogen on it. Slurry, yes, especially in the spring. And soil fertility is very important as well for red clover. So like for both the clovers, to fix nitrogen, they need to fix nitrogen to grow because they use the fixed nitrogen themselves for growth, and they need nodules and they need the bacteria and so on. But soil P and K is very important for nodulation and for the whole process of fixation. And for root growth and plant growth as well. So if soil fertility is below average, it's going to have a negative impact on the potential of the plant to persist in the sward. I suppose the reality is, you get a few good years out of red clover and then it tends to tail off, and that seems to be the nature of the plant. But it certainly can be managed to persist longer by, for example, making sure you're not putting out a lot of chemical or no chemical nitrogen and just put slurry in the spring, that you keep up the soil fertility, that you can get a late, maybe light grazing so that there's not a big heavy cover going into the winter. Ideally, that would be a silage cut, but we all know come October, the potential to get a cut of silage off at that time of the year is limited on a lot of soil types. So a light grazing, maybe with weanlings or something there, can be of benefit. From a chicory point of view, so one of the things about chicory, Deirdre, is to persist, it needs to self-seed. So it has to flower and produce seeds. It doesn't persist very well without the capacity to self-seed. So that in itself is a challenge within our grazing systems to allow the rotation be long enough, because it's going to be sown in a mix, right? Are you going to disadvantage everything else in the sward to allow the chicory to self-seed? So if you do that, then you're going to reduce the overall quality of the sward and of what the animal is eating, and that's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of persistence. Productivity of the animal that's grazing it. Now, having said all that, there is work being done, particularly with red clover, around breeding cultivars for longer persistence and cultivars that might be suitable for grazing systems. So looking at through breeding, reducing the height, if you like, of the growing point in the sward. Chicory, I suppose there isn't a big breeding program in any country that I'm aware of in terms of chicory. There are breeding programs starting, but they're at very early stages in terms of, I suppose, developing some kind of chicory cultivar or species
Yeah.
that would be more suited to a grazing type system. Like chicory in New Zealand is often sown as a, like, we'll call it a catch crop for dry period, but it's reseeded every year, like, or it's sown every year. It's not, it doesn't, it's
It's a
not
seed out.
perennial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not perennial
Yeah.
plant. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess where we are in terms of red clover and chicory at the moment. But like, in sowing red clovers, it can be sown with a perennial ryegrass, a good perennial ryegrass cultivar, and even when the chicory declines in the sward, can still have a sward there that has a good grass cultivar, or maybe a mix of perennial ryegrass cultivars. So the sward can continue to be productive even when the clover content declines in it.
I think chicory as well, it likes a very neutral pH, doesn't it? And
Yes,
then
as
and
far as I know, yes.
your grass kind of wants a 6.2 or a 6.3. So that could be,
Yeah, 6.5 even. Yeah,
yeah,
so slight differences, yeah,
yeah,
in
yeah,
little things like that. But definitely, I suppose our rotation lengths probably limit
yeah.
chicory to a certain extent.
And my fellow with the high molybdenum soils, he's telling me he can't grow clover at all, Deirdre. I think
So
he's about a 5.8 or thereabouts. And he does grow clover, but it doesn't last.
now I can't tell you a
All
whole lot
right.
about that off the top of my head, Deirdre,
I
but
know.
there is an interaction there, and it has to do with so firstly, his soil fertility, or his soil pH, is very low.
Yeah.
So that's not going to help his clover anyway.
No, no, not a bit
And
of
then
it.
there is an issue with high molybdenum and clover. I can't tell you the chemistry of that off the top of my head. And look, there's probably going to be the odd farm like that where it's not going to work, but that doesn't mean it won't work in every field on the farm. There will be
That's
some
true.
fields that it won't
Yeah,
work
he's got
on. Yeah,
sections of the land that that it actually
yeah.
does work.
And
It's
look, there'll
just
be,
every time I'm out there, he's saying, "I can't grow the clover in these fields." I'm like, "That's
but
okay."
that's interesting because that farmer obviously knows there's a big benefit to having clover in the system, and
Absolutely.
he wants to adapt clover as a means of fixing nitrogen and improving herbage quality and so on the farm. It's just unfortunate that he does have some fields where it won't grow for him. And look,
Yeah.
there'll be some very wet clay soils that I probably won't do well in either, because like basically clover will be sitting in wet ground all year, and the temperature will be a little bit lower and so on. And I suppose the capacity for fixation is going to be reduced. So like there'll be some, but for most farms, there will be parts of the farm or all of the farm where clover definitely will work. But look, it does need management no more than anything else that we want to work on the farm needs management.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
fully agree with that.
When we're talking about grass and grass growth, and Deirdre, we've alluded to a few times about the weather, and I think I was driving through Tipperary yesterday, and it's 26 degrees. But I was down in Moore Park last week, and I'm sitting in New Ross at the moment, and we're in drought conditions at the moment. There's very, very little rain. Grass growth is terrible at the moment. And then this seems to be dominating. I was at another discussion group during the week, and a lot of farms around the country, our grass is absolutely lifting out of it at the moment. Down where we are, there seems to be a stretch of land across the bottom of the country where no water, no grass, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. But grass growth models, Deirdre, how do they handle, I suppose, those extreme weather events, be it drought or heavy rain? Does it take for account those kind of conditions?
Yeah, yeah. So if we look at the Elodie's model, the Moore Park, the grass growth model, the most grass growth model, has a big weather component in it, and rainfall is a really important input to the model. Um, and look, I suppose one of the things about the model is so the predictions for grass growth that are published every week is using real farm data from around the country, from actual farms. And I suppose then we have the weather data being fed in via Met Éireann. But and it's probably May, June this year in particular, or for this year, we had an awful lot of localized rain. So I'm in Fermoy right now. There might be no rain here. It could be absolutely pouring rain 5 kilometers away or 6 kilometers away in Mitchelstown. We could go into the city and they mightn't have seen rain for a week. So we've had an awful lot of localized rain. And while the model can deal with really well with the weather data, it needs the actual weather data coming in. And the forecast, and we know forecasting rainfall is quite a challenge, but if we don't have specifics for a specific farm, it does make it a little bit more limited. And look, in time, hopefully the predictive models for rainfall will get even more accurate. I mean, they are fairly accurate and a general scale. But look, a farm is however many 50 hectares or whatever out of that grid of, I can't remember what the grid area is, could be a 2 kilometer grid or a 5 kilometer grid or something like that. So the model can handle those extremes very well, Cahill. But if you then have the localized rainfall, it probably reduces the accuracy of it a bit. But very dry weather, the model definitely can flag that. So if the forecast is telling us no rain for the week ahead, you will see a dip in the prediction in grass growth for that area because there isn't going to be any rain, for example. On the flip, if it's going to be very wet, soils become waterlogged, and the model also can deal with that in terms of reductions that you might see in grass growth there. And I suppose the other thing is if the soil is very wet, it tends to be a little bit colder than if it's if it's dry. So it can adapt to that as well, to the soil temperature and the impact that has on growth. So look, the model is very, very good, and Elodie and her team are working on adapting it on an ongoing basis and improving it and trying to make it more accurate. And I suppose for farmers who eventually will probably be able to get a prediction for their own farm, that'll only be as good as the data that they're putting in terms of grazing, when they graze the paddock, what the cover was. So doing your weekly farm cover, but grazing dates and things like what fertilizer was put out and when it was put out, how much and when it was put out, because nitrogen is another big driver in the model because it's a big driver of grass growth. So yeah, like the model does reflect very well what happens, but I suppose it needs the accurate data going into it to get it out. You've probably heard the saying, Cahill, rubbish in, rubbish out.
I do
for any
on a
model.
day-to-day
And
basis.
but it's the same for all models.
Yeah,
if the data going in isn't good enough, the output isn't going to be as accurate as it could be.
But I think, like, if we use it, it's a very useful tool, like you said, to create data in. And I suppose the second part of that question, or another obstacle maybe, is, we're probably going to have, with sustainable management and climate change, for me, I can see it because we're having mini droughts all the time, it seems to be. Maybe I'm just more prone to looking at it now, but like we have to be so reactive and look at these kind of models and try and be like I'm talking about, being reactive within a couple of days and not waiting for a week or two, or else our grass our wedge will be under pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I suppose we're in an era of data, and there is lots of data available, and it's about using the data. So, measuring your farm cover tells you what you have on your farm right now. But you also have information about what the demand is in terms of your animal numbers and their intake and so on. Then we have the grass growth prediction, which at the moment is kind of given at a county level. But I suppose an important thing to take from the grass growth prediction, maybe it's not the absolute figure for your farm, but the trend. Is it increasing? Is grass growth increasing? Is it roughly the same? Is it predicted to be roughly the same as it was last week? Or is it predicted to decrease because, for example, there is no rainfall forecast? So it's really important to use that kind of information. We have the weather forecast data, which is like at our fingertips now. We can check up Met Éireann on our phones if we want to. So there's lots of information available. We know what fertilizer we are putting out. And it's about bringing all that information together, Cahill, and using that to help inform the decision. So you look at your wedge and you can see in 3 paddocks time, I don't have a lot of grass. So I need to stretch what I have a bit. What supplement am I going to feed? But then on the flip, we look at the graph and we have loads of grass, every paddock is above the line. Well, I'm going to need to take some of them out now for bales. And if I'm feeding concentrate, why am I feeding concentrate? So I need to come away from the heavy covers and go to the paddock that's more in line with my target in terms of pre-grazing herbage mass, cut out the concentrate, and make that decision. And look, it happens a lot. You make bales in May because there's surplus grass growth and you're feeding it back in July. But that's great because it's good quality grass. And you did take the time to make that decision in May to take out the bales. And now you have that high quality to feed back. And look, I think, you know, and you are right, there are parts of the country where they are more prone to drought. And it's about having all your information available and knowing when need to maybe go in with supplement and what level of supplement. And we talk about doing a cover once a week. If you're in a scenario where things are getting tight, maybe you should be doing the cover twice a week. Gives you a better handle. It's probably an hour and a half's work, but I mean, that could be very valuable in terms of, having to buy or not buy extra supplementary feed. And then the other thing is when you can make those high quality bales in end of April into May, make them so that you have them to feed back. And again, you're not having to pay the lorry to come into the yard with extra supplement. So there's lots of information available, Cathal. And look, the reality is I think we need to be more in tune with what's going on our individual farms, and we need to use the information that we have available on our farms to make those decisions. And look, it takes a bit of time, and people have to be confident in doing that. And I think if people aren't sure, they need to reach out to their advisor or their discussion group or somebody that they know who's doing, bit more experienced or a bit more confident. There is help there, but I suppose it's about being proactive rather than reactive. I think that can help reduce stress and make things a little bit easier for everybody to deal with.
Deirdre, the model also seems to have a clover growth and nitrogen fixation figure. Is this going to be able to provide the farmer with, say, a tailored or real-time fertilizer advice?
Yeah, so that's new work that's been done at the moment by
Brilliant.
Clervy, a PhD student in Elodie's group, and it is to build in a clover component to the model. So, and it is trying to look at clover growth, obviously, but also how kind of fixation and what level of nitrogen will be available for plant growth in the sward. And look, the idea would be in time, Deirdre, that there would be true, I suppose, linkages between the grass growth model and pasture base, having them all as one unit and working together, that there would be some level of tailored fertilizer advice could be made available to farmers. And I think that will have huge benefits in terms of the environment, obviously, but also economically for the farmer in terms of purchasing fertilizer and making decisions about where to spread it. So, we were talking about being more efficient and time on the farm earlier. If there is a way of identifying where we need to spread fertilizer, but also where we don't need to, there's a time saving there if you only have to spread 2 paddocks or 2 fields instead of spreading 4, for example. So in time, Deirdre, yes, I like there will be a more tailored advice in terms of fertilizer based on soil nitrogen availability. And I think that'll be very beneficial. It'll be another management tool and more information that the farmer can use again to, I suppose, streamline what they're doing and have lots of different benefits as well.
That's fantastic news. Brilliant.
Yeah. Now I can't give you a time frame on that because, as you know, these things take time. But there's definitely great progress being made on the clover element of the grass growth model.
Brilliant.
One last question for you, Deirdre. And it's probably more of a get your crystal ball out here now, but maybe you have your finger in the pulse. But you've talked a bit about chicory, and we mentioned clovers, red and white, and there has been a bit of a push on multi-species swards over the last number of years, and there's always been that argument. I know some farms and dairy farms are doing a good percentage of it, 35%, and then I know some dairy farmers would say, "Oh, that's only for organic or it's only for beef, or sheep," but like. you look at like New Zealand, and they're using the likes of plantain to reduce nitrate leaching. We're looking at here even to use multi-species to reduce our gaseous emissions and meet our climate targets. Are we on the border of a kind of a renaissance in Irish agriculture, where we're gone from that traditional kind of grassland management in the last 20 years, which has served us really, really well? But is there a change coming, or is the desire there?
That is crystal ball stuff, Cathal. So look, we've been very comfortable probably with our perennial ryegrass nitrogen system. I think everybody accepts and knows that that has to change. I suppose clover is the first step, and we know clover can work very well in our systems. There's been a lot of research done on that, and we have the Clover 150 program that Michael Egan runs out on farms, and they're showing good results out of that, but they're also getting a lot of valuable on-farm experience and data that some of it feeds back to research, and issues may be highlighted that need more research, but it's also really good in terms of that kind of peer-to-peer learning and demonstration for other farmers. In terms of other species, I suppose there's also been a lot of work done in the last 5 or 6 years by Teagasc and UCD and so on, looking at multi-species swards. And look, at the moment, it does look like chicory really doesn't persist in our systems. Plantain seems to persist somewhat. And yeah, it's at different levels in different farms, and even in different experiments, Carl. So it's very difficult to give a recommendation around multi-species swards at the moment. That's not to say that we close the door on them. And I think there is still a lot we need to figure out about them. And I suppose a lot of the work has been on chicory. If we just look at the herbs, has been on chicory and plantain. And I suppose that comes from a place where they look like the most promising for our type of system. But I think there's a lot more we need to do, and there might be another few herbs that could also be effective in our swards. I'm not sure we know what they are. I'm not sure that anybody knows what they might be in terms of, even if we look at research in New Zealand, and you're right, New Zealand have a lot of work going on in plantain. And I suppose plantain seems to be an interesting plant. It's a bit more winter active, so it's using nitrogen, which is good because it's more is going to the plant, less available for leaching. It has some biological nitrification inhibitor potential, but that really hasn't been quantified here yet. I do know there's some research going on that, so that might be another benefit in our systems. Ben Lahart and his team in Moorpark have done some work looking at methane emissions from multi-species swards, and they're finding kind of mixed results. They are seeing maybe that plantain might have some benefit, and then the other thing, if we're adding something to the sward, how long does it stay? The persistence. And Michael O'Donovan and his team have a long-term experiment. I think it's in its 5th year, maybe, in Moorpark, a grazing plot experiment, and looking at various mixtures. But plantain did quite well in the first four or so years there, but its persistence is starting to drop off. So is 4 years better than no years? Yeah, probably is. Through breeding, maybe plantain can be more persistent type of plant. So I haven't really given you an answer to your question, Cathal, because the answer is we don't really know yet. And I don't think we know enough about multi-species to give a solid recommendation on them. There are lots of benefits that they potentially can have. And I think the biggest challenge for our Irish pasture-based system is getting them to persist long-term. Like, a lot of the work that's been done with multi-species has been kind of in grass lays and short rotation grasses, where they're there for maybe 2 years, and often they're cut for hay or silage and they're not necessarily grazed. Our system, I suppose, and look, we often say, oh, we have a unique system, but we actually do. If you go, across Europe, like the level of grazing we have compared to most other countries in Europe is, they're poles apart. New Zealand has a similar system to us, parts of South America and so on. But like, we do have a system that's quite different to the rest of Europe. And yeah, multi-species, I'd say the jury is still out on it, Cathal. I think there probably is a lot more Well, I know there is a lot more research that we need to do there to really have a solid answer for farmers. And I suppose, if you're to ask me what should farmers start to do now to diversify their swards, they do need to look at clover, be that red clover for silage or white clover for grazing. That's where they need to start. And anything else we want to add into our swards has to have another benefit in the system. And that could be environmental or economic or so on. But, we can't close the door on any of that. And there's plenty of research still to be done. Yeah, and look, we have made good strides in red clover and white clover, and there's a lot more to be done. So, again, I haven't fully answered your question, Cathal, but
No,
I've given you my opinions.
Yeah, you've given me a lot there. Deirdre, look, I just want to thank you very much. This was a really interesting and super engaging conversation, and you're after leaving us a lot to think about, and I think we could have stayed for another hour because we have lots more questions. So we might.
Deirdre'd have to go for a lie down after this.
I tell you, we'll chat. We'll definitely have to chat to you again, Deirdre, and maybe catch up on some of the other things you're working on there at the moment. So really, thanks a million for that, and much appreciated.
Thanks, Cathal. Thanks, Deirdre.
So there you have it. Tune in next time to hear more interesting chats and discussion.
Myself and Deirdre will be back in 2 weeks' time, but do give us a review on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Environment Edge podcast.